The small coffee shop on the corner of Maple Street had always been a quiet place. It was a type of spot where the same regulars came in each day, exchanging polite nods with the baristas, grabbing their morning brew, and heading off to their respective daily routines. The atmosphere was warm and cozy, with soft jazz music playing in the background and the scent of freshly ground coffee beans filling the air. But that morning, something felt different. The usual buzz of chatter was muffled, as if the room itself was holding its breath. In the corner booth, a man sat alone, his weathered face partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. His clothes were plain, old jeans and a faded jacket that had seen better days. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard labor, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. But despite his appearance, there was something captivating about him. It was as if his face carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He was an enigma, a man who didn't belong here, but at the same time seemed like he had always been part of the coffee shop's silent, everyday rhythm. The waitress, Lily, had just started her shift. She was in her early 20s, with a bright smile and a heart full of kindness. She worked at the coffee shop because it was the only job she could find in town, but she didn't mind. It gave her a chance to interact with all sorts of people, regulars and strangers alike. Lily was the type of person who noticed the little things. The way a person's eyes lit up when they were greeted by name, the way the coffee smelled when it was just right, and even the subtle gestures that told stories without words. She noticed the man in the corner booth almost immediately. His disheveled appearance caught her attention, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for him. She had seen her fair share of struggling souls in the coffee shop, and she knew what it was like to barely get by. But there was something different about him, a certain air of mystery that made her want to learn more. After a few minutes, she walked over to his table, her notepad in hand. She smiled, her eyes kind but cautious. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" The man looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were deep and dark, like two pools of endless depth. There was a flicker of surprise in his gaze, as if he hadn't expected her to approach him. But then his expression softened, and he gave a small nod. "I'll have a black coffee," he said in a low, gravelly voice. Lily scribbled down his order, but something made her hesitate. She studied his face for a moment longer, sensing that he might need more than just a cup of coffee. There was something in the way he looked at her, a quiet desperation that tugged at her heartstrings. "Would you like a refill on the house? It's a quiet morning, and I don't mind." Her voice was gentle, almost like a whisper. The man stared at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering her offer. It was rare for anyone to be so kind to him, and he was used to being overlooked, treated like just another face in the crowd. But something about this girl's offer seemed different, sincere, without expectation. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice softening. "I'll take you up on that." Lily smiled and walked away to fetch his coffee. As she poured the fresh brew, she couldn't help but wonder about the man. Who was he? Why did he look so worn down, so broken? But she didn't ask questions. That wasn't her place. Instead, she focused on making sure his coffee was just the way he liked it, strong and black, with no frills. When she returned to his table, she set the steaming cup in front of him and smiled warmly. "There you go. One fresh cup of coffee on the house." The man glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to know how to respond to her kindness. It was as if he hadn't experienced it in years. "Thank you," he muttered again, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily gave a nod and turned to leave, but before she could walk away, she heard the man speak again. "Wait," he said, his voice thick with something, guilt, perhaps, or shame. "How much do I owe you for the coffee?" Lily paused and looked back at him, her eyes softening. "You don't owe me anything. It's on the house," she said with a small smile. For a moment, the man stared at her, as if trying to make sense of her words. But then something flickered in his eyes, a strange mix of gratitude and something else, something Lily couldn't quite place. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill. It was the only money he had, and it wasn't much, but it was all he could offer. Lily shook her head, stepping forward and gently pushing his hand back down. "I said it's on the house," she insisted. The man didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at her with those deep, unreadable eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was thick, almost tangible. Then, without another word, the man took a sip of his coffee. Lily smiled and turned to leave, but just as she was about to walk away, the door to the coffee shop opened with a loud creak. Two men walked in. They were dressed sharply, their suits pristine, and their shoes polished to perfection. They immediately caught the attention of everyone in the room. Their presence was commanding, and their voices were loud enough to carry across the room. "Where's the old man?" one of the men asked, scanning the room with a sense of urgency. The other man was already moving toward the corner booth, his eyes locked onto the same man Lily had been serving. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't explain it, but something about the way the two men looked at the old man made her feel uneasy. It was as if they were hunting him down, as if he was something they needed to find. The first man stopped in front of the old man's table, his expression cold and businesslike. "There you are," he said. "We've been looking for you." The old man didn't seem surprised. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he took another sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving the cup. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an underlying tone of caution. The second man, a tall figure with slicked-back hair, leaned in slightly, his tone almost apologetic. "You don't remember us, do you? We're from the company. You know, the one you've been working with for the past few years." His smile was tight, his eyes glinting with something Lily couldn't place. Lily felt a knot form in her stomach. There was something off about the whole situation. The way the men were speaking, the way they looked at the old man, it didn't add up. The old man didn't look like someone who would work with a company, let alone a high-profile one. The man in the baseball cap, the one who had been so quiet, finally set his coffee down. He looked up at the two men, his face still unreadable. "I'm sorry, but I'm not who you think I am," he said quietly. The two men exchanged a glance, and for the first time, Lily saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They hadn't expected him to deny it. "Come on," the first man said, his voice insistent. "We have a lot to talk about. Your time is running out." The second man stepped forward, reaching out a hand, but the old man recoiled slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he said firmly. For a moment, there was a tense silence, and then the first man sighed and straightened his suit. "We'll give you some time to think about it," he said. "But don't take too long. You know what's at stake." The two men turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the old man staring after them. Lily, unsure of what to do, walked over to his table again, her heart racing. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, her voice full of concern. The man didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, staring at the door, as if contemplating something deep and heavy. Finally, he looked up at Lily, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I didn't want them to find me," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "But it looks like they've finally caught up to me." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. There was so much more to this man than she had ever imagined. And for the first time, she realized that she had just been part of something much bigger than a simple coffee order. As the minutes ticked by, Lily found herself caught in the gravity of the situation, unsure of what the future held, for the man, for her, and for the mysterious story that was unfolding right before her eyes. The old man stared at Lily for what felt like an eternity, his eyes shifting between the door and her face. There was something about the way he looked at her, almost as if he was weighing his options, deciding whether or not he could trust her. His hands, calloused and worn, trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee once again, his fingers brushing the edge of the mug. Lily stood frozen, unsure of what to say. She had no idea who these men were, what they wanted from the old man, or why they had come into the coffee shop like they were chasing a ghost. But she knew one thing for sure. There was something deeply unsettling about it all. It was as if the very air in the room had thickened, weighed down by secrets and untold stories. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to sense when something was off, but this was something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She opened her mouth to speak, but before the words could escape, the old man raised a hand, signaling for her to wait. He wasn't ready to talk yet, not until he had processed everything. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting out the window as if searching for something or someone in the distance. "They're not who they say they are," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible. "And I'm not who you think I am." Lily's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. What was he trying to say? Who was he really? She took a step closer, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Who are they?" she asked softly, leaning slightly over the table. "What do they want from you?" The old man let out a sigh, his breath heavy with the weight of his past. He looked at her then, his eyes dark and intense, as if searching her soul for something. For a moment, he seemed to be lost in thought, but then he spoke again, his voice low and full of bitterness. "They want me to come back," he said, his words carrying a certain gravity. "They want me to return to the life I left behind." Lily didn't understand. The life he left behind? What life was he talking about? She glanced around the coffee shop, as if expecting someone to come in at that moment and explain everything. But the place was still empty, save for the two of them. "Return to what?" she pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of life?" The old man's face hardened, his jaw clenched as if he was fighting back a flood of emotions. For a moment, he seemed like he was on the verge of saying something monumental, something that could change everything. But then, as quickly as the moment had come, it was gone. He sat back in his seat, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of the conversation had become too much to bear. I don't know how to explain it," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "There are some things in life that you can never run from. No matter how far you go, they always find you. Always." Lily didn't know what to say. She felt like she was sitting on the edge of a cliff, peering into a chasm of untold stories, and yet the old man was pulling her closer to the precipice. She wanted to help, to make sense of it all, but the deeper she got into his words, the more confused she became. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. It was the question that had been on her mind since she first saw him, the question that now burned in her chest. "I don't mean to pry, but who are you really?" The old man's expression shifted again, this time a faint glimmer of something. Fear, perhaps, flickering in his eyes. It was as if he was finally realizing that he had said too much, that there was no going back now. I used to be someone important," he said slowly, his words careful and measured. "Someone with a lot of power, a lot of influence. But that life," he paused, his voice trailing off. "That life isn't mine anymore. I left it behind a long time ago." Lily frowned, trying to piece together what he was saying. Someone important? A man with power and influence? It didn't add up. He looked like a man who had seen the hardest years of his life, someone who had been beaten down by the world. And yet his words suggested a past so far removed from his current state that it felt almost surreal. You left it behind," she repeated, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "Why? Why would you leave all that?" The old man's eyes darkened, his gaze shifting to the floor as if he were remembering something painful. "Because it wasn't worth it," he muttered, his voice thick with regret. "I had everything, money, power, respect. But in the end, it was all just a lie. A game that I couldn't keep playing anymore." Lily's mind raced. She couldn't wrap her head around it. A billionaire? Someone who had walked away from it all? It sounded like something out of a movie, something too unbelievable to be true. But there was something in his voice, something raw and honest, that made her believe him. "Are you saying you're a billionaire?" she asked cautiously, her voice barely a whisper. The old man looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers with a strange intensity. For a moment, he didn't say anything, as if considering how much to reveal. Then, with a sigh, he nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "I was." Lily's heart raced. She felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The man sitting across from her wasn't just some random stranger. He wasn't just a lost soul wandering through life. He was someone who had lived a life that most people could only dream of. He had touched the heights of wealth and power. And now, here he was, sitting in this little coffee shop, drinking a cup of coffee, looking like a man who had nothing left. "Why are you here?" Lily asked, her voice barely above her breath. "What do you want from all this?" The old man's eyes softened as he gazed at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure," he said quietly. "Maybe I just want to be left alone. Maybe I just want to fade into the background, away from everything that came before. But there are people who won't let that happen." Lily nodded, understanding more than she cared to. She had seen it before, the way people with power were never really free. The weight of their pasts always caught up with them, no matter how far they tried to run. And it seemed that the old man's past had finally caught up to him. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice full of empathy. She could see the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried with every breath he took. The old man hesitated, as if he was grappling with something deep within himself. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know one thing. You don't deserve to be caught up in this. You don't deserve to be dragged into my mess." Lily shook her head. "You don't have to worry about me," she said, her voice firm. "I just want to help. Whatever you need, I'll be here." The old man's eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude passing through them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But the people I'm running from," he paused, his face tightening with fear. "They'll come for you, too. They'll find you, just like they found me." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the fear in his voice, and it was enough to make her second-guess everything she thought she knew about him. This wasn't just some man running from his past. This was someone who had made enemies, someone whose life had become a game of cat and mouse with people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. "I'll be fine," Lily said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But what if they come back? What if they're looking for you again?" The old man stood up slowly, his movements stiff, as though every joint in his body ached with the weight of the years. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low and resolute. "But this time, I'm not running. This time, I'm going to end it once and for all." Lily watched as he walked towards the door, his every step deliberate, as if he were preparing himself for something monumental. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she knew one thing. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The door of the coffee shop creaked open as the old man stepped into the afternoon sunlight, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, watching him disappear into the busy streets of the city, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness, as though she had just sent him out into a storm without an umbrella. She had offered him her help, her understanding, but what could she really do? She was just a waitress, a woman who had found herself caught in the crossfire of a man's turbulent past. The bustling noise of the street felt distant, muffled, as if the world around her had gone silent. She could still feel the weight of his gaze when he had looked at her, a gaze that held so many unspoken words, so many years of regret and loss. It was clear now that the old man wasn't just an ordinary figure. He was someone who had been through things Lily could never even begin to comprehend. His words echoed in her mind. "You don't deserve to be caught up in this." But was she? Was she really caught up in something that she didn't fully understand? And if she was, what would she do about it? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her reverie. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the screen. It was a message from her manager, reminding her to check in on the afternoon rush and make sure the other staff were handling things. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the unease gnawing at her didn't fade. The old man's words, his presence, the strange tension that had filled the room, it all felt like a puzzle she couldn't piece together. Who were the people he was running from? Why was he running in the first place? And why had he chosen her to confide in? She turned back to the counter, trying to shake off the feeling that something was about to happen, something she wasn't ready for. Her hands moved instinctively, wiping down the counter, preparing for the next set of customers. But her mind was elsewhere. Every minute that passed felt like it was bringing her closer to some inevitable confrontation. She knew the world wasn't as simple as it appeared, but today had reminded her just how much she didn't know. People were complicated, and sometimes the past was a dangerous thing to try to outrun. As the door chimed open once more, Lily looked up, expecting to see another regular customer. But this time, it wasn't the usual crowd. Two men stepped into the coffee shop, sharp suits, cold.